Welcome to our event today. I know we have quite a few people joining us. If you are jumping on early, please take a minute or so to fill out the poll question that is up on your screen before we jump into today's event. We appreciate you being on with us this afternoon or this morning or this evening, wherever you are joining from in the world. And thank you to those who have started answering the poll question. I think we will get started. We've got a good amount of individuals joining. Again, if you are just jumping on with us, please take a moment to fill out the welcome question that is up on your screen. What are you hoping to learn from today's event? And do you have any specific questions you are hoping to get answers to over the next hour? And on behalf of the entire team at E&E Leader, I welcome you to Energy Cost Management Strategies in an Uncertain Macro Climate. Very hot topic in today's world. My name is Jessica Hunt, and I am one of the co-owners, co-presidents of E&E Leader, and we are very pleased to have members from Redaptive and PwC on with us today. Before we get into the meat of today's event, I do want to go over a few housekeeping items with attendees. This event is going to be recorded, so do not feel the need to take notes or, jot down everything that you hear us discussing. You will be able to watch this on demand starting tomorrow. If you have specific questions for our speakers, please submit them over the next 45 minutes or so using the Q&A button that is at the bottom of your screen. I can't promise that we will get to every single question, but if we don't get a chance to answer your specific question, the team at Redaptive is going to be following up with an email that has all of the questions that were submitted along with the answers, and that goes for everybody that is joining us today. So don't worry. If you haven't already done so in the chat, please let us know where you're joining from. I'm in the very, very hot climate of Washington, D.C. right now, hoping for some cooler weather, which I think is coming our way. Again, we are very pleased to have both Worth and Youssef on with us today. And before we really get into today's presentation, I do want to go over a couple of things about how this is going to work. Today's event is really a panel discussion where I will be moderating and asking questions, and we are not going to necessarily wait until the very end of the event to answer questions from the audience. So if Worth or Youssef is answering one of the questions and you have something that pops into your head that you would like them to address, please feel free to submit using the question button live so that we can hopefully get a chance to answer that during the most relevant part of the discussion. So I'm going to turn it over to Worth to let him tell you a little bit about himself, and then Youssef, and then we'll get started.
Sounds great. Thank you everyone for joining. So Worth Gentry here from the Redaptive side. I'm one of our heads of product. Been with Redaptive about 3 years, watched it as the organization has really evolved to being a broader energy as a service provider. My background is prior to Redaptive, kind of a sustainability oriented risk consultant, advising financial institutions on a variety of risk topics. Excited to chat. Youssef, hand it over to you.
Yeah, hi everyone. Youssef Mestari, Managing Director at PwC, mostly leading the decarbonization, energy efficiency, and energy cost out initiatives for U.S. market and mostly industrials. Prior to joining PwC, spent my whole career, 20 years spent between consulting and industrials, whether it's process industry or building automations, focused on energy savings, optimization, cost optimization. Very, very glad to be here and look forward for this awesome discussion and webinar.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. And then just to let everybody know, unfortunately, we will not get to see Youssef's face today. There were some tech issues on the back end, but don't worry. Obviously, he is still here to give us his expertise. So let's kick off today's event. Redaptive, how are your clients thinking differently about infrastructure resilience in light of today's macroeconomic uncertainty? And I think before we really jump into Worth, before I have you jump into that question, I think it would be helpful to give background on what the macroeconomic climate is actually like for those who are not necessarily familiar.
Certainly, certainly. So I think uncertain is really the only word that can be used to describe the current macroeconomic climate. You have very unclear regulatory policy from the U.S. federal side between tariffs, between different immigration policies. How's that going to affect labor? You're still organizations are still trying to figure out what is the actual impact of AI going to look like. How is this going to reinvent different ways of working? There's increasing geopolitical instability in a number of regions, and that's flowing through to supply chain challenges, potentially uncertain and volatile energy prices. And really, all of that culminates into uncertainty. And then when we're thinking about uncertainty, I think the background for kind of infrastructure resiliency, like resiliency is playing a much bigger role in any decision-making process. And it's not even resiliency to necessarily protect against potential downside risks from the macroeconomic kind of backdrop, but it's to be able to capture upside and capture opportunity. And that is the real kind of driver that we're seeing a lot of from the resiliency standpoint, is how can organizations best position themselves through being more resilient from a facility standpoint, financial standpoint, operational standpoint, to be successful.
No, makes complete sense. Youssef, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think from what I've seen, my past discussions with clients recently, you see like the biggest risk that we've seen so far being considered, at least from the operation side, it's the tariff, as Worth mentioned, and then how a company, the real question is how a company can absorb the cost inflation due to tariff without passing it systematically to customers, right? So in a space where price elasticity can be very sensitive, and therefore an increase of price to the end customers can lead to a reduction of revenue and pipeline. Therefore, like everything has to be done within the company to absorb as much as possible that, which means there is tremendous efforts going on around cost cutting initiatives. And you've seen in the news some of them are related to human resources or divestiture, but one that is under the radar but highly looked into is energy savings. How can the energy savings be part of the equations to help companies to solve for the tariff pressure? CapEx reduction is another one. We can talk about it.
No, excellent. And in terms of cost control and resilience strategies, besides obviously the ones that you talked about, HR and energy savings, how, when you are working with your clients, how easy is it, or feasible, I should say, is it for them to really get on board with everything that you're bringing to the table, given today's uncertain climate?
I think it depends on the level of discussion and the stakeholder we're engaging with, right? So basically, I think there is we have to adapt to who are we talking to and what's their decision power and who's holding the checkbook, right? Basically. So to your point, like ideally, when you think about a cost transformation, a holistic transformation across the enterprise, this is a discussion with the CFO or a CEO. But that's the ideal case, but it does not happen all the time. And therefore, sometimes we talk to general managers who manage specifically some business unit or manufacturing plants. And therefore, it's much more detailed and narrowed on specific plans, specific initiatives within the budget that is allowed for those customers.
Yeah, and I think just building on kind of what Youssef was commenting, when you're thinking about resiliency, it does end up being a top of the house discussion item. And even if we're kind of on the adaptive side, we're talking to plant managers, facility managers. One of the main ways that we're seeing success in teeing up resiliency as a topic is helping them feel prepared to present up in those organizations to really show this is the value of resiliency, and showing the business case through uncertainty, and quantifying that, identifying what the key value levers are in order to drive projects and have more resilient operations overall.
Which makes sense, because obviously the higher up you go, they're looking at the bottom line. They want to know how much they're going to be spending and how much they're going to be saving. So no, I like that. And I know, Yusuf, you mentioned CapEx earlier. Can you go into a little bit, and Worth, I'll stay with you here, talking about why CapEx is becoming such a bigger focus, specifically, why capital preservation is increasingly becoming paramount in navigating uncertainty?
Yeah, I think there is a multiple conflicting agenda, but they're all at the top priority for clients. You have the agenda of growing the business. That's that's the essence of existence of any company, and therefore it comes with organic growth and inorganic growth. But when you look at organic growth, then therefore it's all about capex. It's about expansions of operations, expansion of geographical footprint, of operational throughput, and so on and so forth. So that comes down to capex. Now, that bucket of capex is also competing against running the business, not growing the business. And when you run the business, it's just keeping the business running as is and making it resilient and sustainable over time, which means doing the necessary upgrade improvements just to maintain the level of performance a company is at. And then you have another level of capex that is coming from another angle, which is sustainability related. Like if they have other goals than financial goals, they have committed to SBTI targets or decarbonization or carbon zero by so and so, then they have also a kind of list of projects they need to undertake, whether it's solar on the roof, whether it's a upgrade or retrofit of the lighting or HVAC or industrial equipment. So now you have you have this fight for capex. And always the capex is always like the available capex will always be by definition lesser than the sum of everyone's the wish list of everyone. And I think that's sort of the dilemma that we're trying to solve for clients is like, how do you maximize the number of projects you want to do across growing your business, keeping your business, and achieving your sustainability goal without increasing the limited capex you have. So this is where creative and energy as service, for example, could become like a new avenue of explorations that can solve the problem.
Exactly. And I think one of the pieces that I would love to highlight from Yusuf's answer is all those various different buckets of capex that exist. And one of the themes that comes up a lot in our recent client conversations are like capex is just providing flexibility. The more capital that organizations are able to hold back and actually control where it's going to be invested allows them to be flexible and take advantage of the specific area that makes the most sense for them at a given point in time. If that means hardening infrastructure in disaster-prone regions and being ready for future grid outages or facility downtimes due to hurricanes or other natural disasters, that may be the highest priority for a manufacturer that has a lot of plants in Texas and Florida, whereas it's a very different priority for a manufacturer in California that may be more oriented around expanding their production equipment and growing their business to take advantage of some other trend or some of the regulatory developments where they see an opportunity from the tariffs. So the importance of being able to save capital investment for core business activities is one of the most attractive pieces of some of these alternative financing structures for energy efficiency and kind of facility type projects that wouldn't necessarily be as high return as investing in the core.
Got it. Now, what size businesses are we talking about here? Because I know that we have quite a few people that are joining from maybe small, medium-sized enterprises all the way up to, the Fortune 500s and beyond. So how can you, how do you guys work in terms of structuring these projects and basically the layout for the small, medium-sized enterprises versus the larger corporations?
Yeah, so I think this is a very interesting part of just the overall energy efficiency project financing space. Is there are so many different ways to provide different financing structures to meet whatever kind of business needs or characteristics of their existing capital structure, or how they want to have those cash flows. So for smaller businesses, you may have financing that ends up being tied more to specific equipment, or there are other kind of mitigation strategies to address some of those opportunities for larger businesses where they do have already access to kind of extensive amounts of debt or equity financing. If they have access to capital markets, like the structure can maybe look completely identical, where there's some sort of equipment sitting in the background, or they're able to get access to larger pools of capital given their size, so that you can scale up and do more projects across a portfolio faster. But for both businesses, I think the small and medium sized enterprises, as well as your Fortune 50 organizations, I think that exploring financing for energy efficiency, on-site generation, and storage projects is always a viable option, and something that everyone should be considering.
No, I couldn't agree more. Youssef, did you have anything you wanted to add before we continue?
Yeah, I think there is just to kind of it lands on the same conclusion, but taking a different angle. Um, you know, it does not really matter the size of the business. What matters is if energy is one of your top 3 cost center. If for a company the energy is one of the biggest costs, right, then it is worth looking into it. Now, the next question that invite companies to ask is, if energy is one of the top 3 cost centers, how what's their perspective on the amount of energy that goes into critical equipment that basically, if it's not powered, it shuts down or can kill people or stop the productions, versus ancillary, like around it but not critical. And I think that this is where you start thinking about different levers of improvement of energy reductions. For when it's critical, you go, you assess the risk of disruption before you start touching anything. But when it's let's say adjacent and not critical, then there is a lot of initiatives that can be done, from whether it's capex initiatives or software-based optimization and so on and so forth. But I think sort of for me, the biggest message is regardless of the size of the company, is the size of your energy bill compared to your total cost. And there is something you can do about it, and there are some savings that needs to be done. This is not a constraint, this is a variable, and you can change things by operating differently while producing exact same quality of products, throughput, or providing the same services.
No, I think that is great advice. Now it kind of goes into our next part of the discussion. And both of you have worked obviously in manufacturing and healthcare centers. I would love to see some examples of where energy initiatives really prevented cost overruns or operational disruptions, because that's a question that comes up. It's actually one that came up in our opening poll question earlier today. So I think that'd be a good time to address that.
Yeah, I think I can speak at least maybe of a manufacturing example. So Redapt engaged with a global beverage producer for one of their plants in Puerto Rico, and provided that with a microgrid solution. So there's some solar, there's a gas turbine, I think some storage included in that project. But the main driver there is just given the positioning of Puerto Rico, and to get back to the natural disaster point, the grid is unstable. So having independent power supply enables them to harden their operations and get back up and running in the event that a disaster would have occurred that knocked out grid grid control. And I think that one interesting development we've seen around kind of resiliency, and when we're talking to clients about resiliency and how they think about it, is a much bigger emphasis on what is my actual cost of downtime going to look like. Like it's not even necessarily what costs am I incurring, but it's the opportunity cost of not being able to operate their assets as intended. That ends up being the major driver for these resiliency oriented business cases. And it doesn't even have to just be areas where the power, like you have power concerns. You may also have, we do a bunch of projects that relate to central plant equipment, where the central plant is feeding their processes, that if you have a boiler go out, because of it's old, you haven't had a strong maintenance plan for a whole variety of reasons, like being able to actually harden that and prevent downtime from occurring becomes very easy to justify the economics of doing those sorts of improvements.
Well, and it's the systematic breakdown after the fact too, in terms of the supply chain. It's going to disrupt everything. If your manufacturing facility is not working to produce the goods or whatever it may be that's going to get shipped out, then the supply chain is affected, and it's a domino effect. So it's really, you've got to look at the entire value chain too.
Exactly, and your costs are probably 50% higher because you're doing rushed work. If you can even get the necessary equipment, like you may not have the right parts on site. To again, tariff supply chain questions: how quickly can you get the part? Do you need to go and rent an external chiller to bridge that gap? That just becomes a very complex operational questions that can be mitigated by being a little more proactive on the infrastructure resiliency.
No, definitely. And then Youssef, I'd love for you to touch on the healthcare industry, especially, hospitals, they have to be up and running. It's life and death there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, for healthcare, it's the problem statement is less so on the energy savings because the patient experience and patient safety during surgeries and so on matter more than kilowatt savings. So the problem statement was mostly around energy resilience as opposed to energy savings. And in those situations, like the way we solve is like, how do you decorrelate the dependence on the grid and decorrelate on from the fluctuation of the price of the electricity coming from the grid, right? So on those two things then it's mostly around a strategy around solar and battery storage, and then combined with element around energy procurement and negotiations, plus some smartness added to the building, like, for example, load shedding, load shifting for non-critical assets or non-critical equipment. For example, washer and dryers for the bed sheets, for example, or lighting for specific low occupancy areas. So I think that this is one example, for example, where you could see, depending on the problem to solve, there are different solutions that come in place. Some of them are heavy capex, like the battery storage and solar, but others are very light capex because it's mostly optimization and sensors and IoT, and let's say in optimization. Some of them could be AI. Some of them are just basic rules of, if there is nobody in a room, switch off the lights, and that's how you can start having as a side result some savings, but but keeping the main objective is about resilience and patient safety, patient comfort, and patient experience.
No, that's great. And I'm thinking, I know we mentioned earlier the stuff at the federal level is changing, but how do you mitigate and how do you go between, federal regulations and then the various state regulations that are constantly changing in terms of working with your clients in different areas of the country?
Yeah, I think speaking on the adaptive side, I know that our clients struggle with this. Keeping track of everything is a massive burden. You have different building performance standards. They may exist at a city level, municipality level, county, state. You have different federal standards, and just having your arms around all those different regulations becomes a challenging challenging issue. And one of the primary ways that we're able to accomplish it from the Redaptive standpoint is through our strong network of partners that have that more localized knowledge. And then since we're looking at lots of projects across different accounts, like when we find developments and regulations for, say, Energize Denver, just because I'm sitting in Denver, that we know what the specific rules are for Denver, sharing that information back to clients as well as just to others in the space of, okay, what are your plans for Energize Denver? And I think it's really the ecosystem partnership to be able to keep up with all the rapidly changing space and make sure that you're adhering to any laws and regulations.
Yeah. I think, if I can add to that, it's from PwC side, we have a national office that keeps a very close eye to on the incentives and the regulations, right? So whether it's local, state, or federal, every single change, every single intent of change is being tracked and followed very closely, right? And it's important to do so, because as we help clients on their whether it's their sustainability journey or their energy cost out initiatives, it's important to figure out, like, what's the funding, what's the pay for such initiatives. Energy as a saving is one of them, but we like to combine that with all the incentives that can be tapped into, and making sure that everything is being compliant. And therefore, the changing landscape is forever changing, and our team just help us, tell us the latest and greatest that needs to be included. Like, for example, the incentives for solar is about to be phased out starting from 1st of January 2026. Right. So now what we have 6 months left in case anyone has some solar strategy. There is a need to move fast, right? And then by 2027 it's going even lower. So I think those are the things, like, for example, to watch out as we define, like, whether it's an energy strategy or a sustainability strategy. How do you infuse all those inputs in order to create a roadmap that is the most cost efficient?
Yeah, and I think just want to build on that, like, really the importance of the rebates and incentives in making projects work. That the programs do become incredibly specific, and every single utility has different rules for how they want to deploy it. But that is where the greatest opportunity for getting external funding to get projects across the line exists. So while you need to keep an eye on both the federal national level incentives like the ITC, PTC, any other tax credits, the hyper local focus and relationships with utilities, knowing who's administering the incentive programs, is also highly valuable to potentially get a boosted project economics.
And as you guys were speaking about that, and I'm glad you said that you brought up the changes with solar. And speaking from the residential perspective, we have solar on our house. We produce more energy than we actually consume, and that goes with even having a charger, an EV charger in our house. We sell back to the grid. We sell credits back to the grid. Well, the amount of money that we received is dropped drastically. How do you factor that possibility or uncertainty in with clients who at the commercial level are able to sell credits back, but those prices are changing?
Yeah, I think the starting point for having those conversations becomes scenario analysis. So I think bring all the way back to the resiliency and risk discussion. The best way to figure out what steps the businesses should take is plan out those worst case scenarios. So we're currently running different scenarios for a variety of our solar storage projects of, hey, this is what the different phase out options can look like for ITC and PTC, or this is what it looks like if that's able to remain. We'll then talk if they're selling it back to the grid and say they're monetizing some of the renewable energy certificates and RECs that come off of that system. What do different future price curves look like against those instruments? And then depending on kind of the level of risk appetite for that client, maybe a discussion can go of, hey, we may be able to find a contracted offtake for the RECs into kind of a 10, 15 year term at a lower cost, or you can try to absorb that upside. But as we're going through this conversation, I think it's clear of just there are so many different moving pieces and variables that you just have to pick out what do you as a business think the most likely outcome is going to look like based on your situation, and then try to model that.
No, I think that's really important. Now, have you ever, and I think I already know the answer to this, but working with a client, say you have a strategy in place, you've implemented the strategy, 6 months in, you're looking at all the data, and then you have to take a step back and realize you need to change things up. How difficult is it to, I don't want to say restart the entire process, but kind of change directions with the energy, savings model that you have worked with this client on?
Yeah, it happens very frequently. You learn what can actually happen with a project as you go deeper and deeper in the development cycle. I think one of the most unique things about the energy as a service model, or if you're using other kind of financing vehicles, is that there is flexibility for these kinds of scope changes, because it just becomes a shift in how are you either passing through the shared savings portion of that offering, just based on what is going to change in the scope. Is just an update to the overall calculations, but it doesn't disqualify what a project can look like as we learn more through scoping and development phases. It just helps us be more accurate at the end of the day for deploying that project.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, like there's two rules, golden rules that we try to use from our side. Is the number one is try not to overpromise and underdeliver. So as we model the savings, there is a contingency there baked in. There is baked on the risk of fluctuation of some sensitive inputs, and how can make the business case swing. And therefore we kind of we don't shoot for the best scenario, but we bake in some sensitivity there to make sure that whatever we commit on is basically under promise and over deliver scenario. The second thing is, as we define the business case, it comes down to developing a short list of initiatives that needs to be deployed on site. And it could vary. Some initiatives would be different from one site to another, but at the end of the day, you come up with a list of things that needs to be done and fixed across the assets of the enterprise. Now, this list of initiatives is usually a cutoff from the exhaustive list. So therefore, there are initiatives that don't make the cut, and we keep them in back burner for like whether phase 2 or whatnot. So in case we don't achieve, like worst case scenario, it happens really rarely, but if it does happen, then you look back at those who didn't make the cut and say, which one should we add up in order to make up the gap that we have versus what we have promised.
Yeah, and I think that this idea of kind of the backlog projects is very important. Something that we're seeing more and more commonly on our side is increasing blending of project economics to be able to knock out more items on that list. Kind of, I think you've indicated of like a solar and storage project, very capital intensive. Controls probably not as capital intensive, but you can get significant savings from a controls installation. Deploy some of those savings to help offset the business case for getting like a solar and storage system, or potentially just even deferred HVAC maintenance across the line, because those are projects that just wouldn't happen on their own.
No, that's
I think
great.
that's a very good point. Sorry, Jessica. I think that's a very good point here, because, and we've seen this so many times. Usually, companies look at it at silos. We're going to do LED lighting, and then we're going to do HVAC system, and then we're going to do solar, and then we're going to do this. It's siloed, and every siloed initiative is being assessed by itself on an ROI and etc. And usually, like, most of the companies are looking at a payback between, private equities are around 3 years, and then, other institutions are around 5 years or 7 years. I think that a great point that Worth is making is, when you don't look at it from a silo perspective, but as a bundle, you bundle how much of LED will be mixed with some of the solar or some of the HVAC upgrade, you can still land below that, meet that ROI target, but still passing some of the initiative that would have passed by itself. But because you're mixing them with, for example, LED lighting that has a 2-year payback, with a 7-year payback for HVAC, but as you mix those two together, you can make a bigger project, bigger savings, while still meeting the 5-year cutoff, payback basically. And I think that's something that I invite companies to consider, looking at bundles of initiatives as opposed and optimizing portfolio-wide initiatives as opposed to siloed site by site, technology by technology deployment.
Yeah, and the portfolio piece of the bundling is also just so critical. Like we've run into a number of instances with clients where you find out that they're just deploying capital for doing maintenance and repairs, kind of in a pseudo peanut butter spread fashion. But if you're looking at it from the corporate level, and this is probably typically not where the P&L may be owned, but there will be more like optimal ways to deploy that capital, because some sites need more work than others. So it's not only the bundling of individual projects and measures at a given location, but then the bundling across different sites to really maximize the business case and the return on that investment.
No, which kind of brings me to the next question that I was going to ask you, and it has to do with prioritizing upgrades across the portfolio. And you've talked about some of the items that we're going to discuss, but what are some really common missteps besides just siloing everything and putting a Band-Aid on something? So what are some common missteps when facility teams try to do more with less?
Yeah,
Go
go ahead.
Go ahead, Wolf.
Okay. Yeah, I think one of the major missteps is around that planning dimension. Like when you're strapped for resources, strapped for time, the planning and being very intentional about that is one of the first things that can tend to fall out. I think the second pillar where facility teams to struggle from having a lack of resources is having access to the right level of data across an entire portfolio to be able to even make these decisions. So you're in this tough spot where everything is breaking all the time. You have to go out, you're repairing things, just trying to keep the business operating. You don't have the brain space to actually do the full portfolio level planning, and you don't have data. Like if you want to actually do the portfolio planning, you're calling up every single person at a site if you don't have a bill pay provider or an FM provider to get equipment lists, to get utility bills, to then start thinking about that prioritization, that get a more efficient bundling model becomes just completely impossible to do if you don't have the resources dedicated to ensuring that type of success.
I can think, just to add to that, I think 3 probably additional missteps. Number 1 is there is a pattern of try to pay everything from their own pocket. And I think, that means, there is incentives out there that can be captured and maximized. There are energy as a service that can help. There are different ways of funding a program as opposed to just going internally and fighting for CapEx against other departments that have other agenda. That's number 1. I think number 2 is when it comes to designing the program, the misstep is thinking about it like silo by silo. Let me do first all the LEDs, and then once I finish my program on the LEDs, I'll come back and think about something else. I think it's suboptimal. You don't achieve the highest savings. You don't leverage most from your resources and program management to deploy this, and you create more disruptions to your operation across site because you gotta come back every time and do something else and something new. And sometimes when you try to run one initiative at a time, there is some rework. What you've done before has to be redone in order to make it compliant, in order to plug it with the BMS and whatnot, right? So building management system and so forth. So I think, thinking about programmatic approach as opposed to siloed step, phase, or let's say initiative by initiative approach. And then the third one is there is a mindset of DIY, especially because when it comes to energy, it falls within whether it's facility management, whether it's engineering department, whether it's energy management department, there is a lot of engineer. I'm an engineer, but there's a lot of engineers out there in those organizations or departments, and therefore there is a mindset of DIY. So like, yeah, we can manage it by ourselves. We've seen again and again managing, for example, solar assets when your business is in manufacturing or in hospitals, it's completely out of your skill set, and you're gonna land into a suboptimal operations with more maintenance and more losses, and therefore a depreciation of your assets, and not and then compromising your ROI from the business model. I think there are companies out there that can take over the operation, the management, the maintenance, and guarantee those savings, those operational performance. And I think that's something, when you run the numbers, DIY will cost you more because of all the losses than leveraging a core competence company that is only focused on that specific thing you're looking for.
No, that makes complete sense. I know earlier we talked a little bit about business cases and making sure that you have a strong business case to present to your clients, as well as for them to present to the higher ups at their company. So how are you seeing finance leaders react to capital light energy projects? And what is how would you define a capital light energy project?
Yeah, I mean, maybe to start, I think something that we frequently see from finance leaders is they are probably not looking at a lot of the energy projects that we are pitching, because they don't make it up to that level necessarily, since some of them will be smaller and it's on a site by site basis. But once they get consolidated together, and I know we've beaten this point to death at this point, but once you're bundling together lots of measures across lots of sites, that becomes the CFO level number and point to go optimized for. So I think really bundling and showing this is what the entire universe of possibilities could look like for doing projects is the first way to get on their radar, because it has to be worth their time. It has to get them out of bed. I think the second piece that makes these kind of projects go better, and particularly under the energy as a service structure, is through having kind of a measurement and verification platform or sub-metering or tracking of the utility bills, and actually being able to prove out that savings are happening and show, hey, we've done these projects previously, this is the result of them, we're now ready to do another big phase deployment. That those proof points become very, very salient for doing follow-on phases of work and expanding across a full portfolio. And I think third dimension, specifically around the financing and capital light, it's really the kind of ideal outcome, I think, for almost every finance leader in an organization. Yusuf kind of touched on it under his comments for the DIY approach. You don't want to be spending your capital, and if you're a manufacturer, you should be deploying your capital in order to make more widgets, not necessarily RTUs in your offices, right? The ability to have dedicated funds and external sources of funding, be that rebates and incentives or energy as a service funding, other sorts of performance contracting, equipment finance, to be able to deploy for those assets is very attractive, so that the capital can be focused on the core business activities.
No, I think I wouldn't say it better. I think there is that ROIC, the return on invested capital, right? So therefore, when there is a capex available, it has to be deployed like in a smart way, where there is the highest return, whether it's sustainability, whether it's energy, whether it's operation increase or expansions or acquisitions. I think definitely there is a arbitrage has to be done there, but does not mean you have to deprioritize everything else, right? If energy does not make the cut, you can still leverage other sources of funding, like we mentioned. And then to your point, like I think there is two approach there, and just to reinforce what Worth mentioned is if this energy initiatives and program is able to provide like a meaningful impact to the P&L, to the level that he can go up there and present it to during investor relations, during investor days, and can say, hey, here is my P&L, here is how we did last year, and here's how much we did, and we improved by so and so, then that's a CFO, CXO level discussion, and we can talk about program across the enterprise. That's the ideal case, but does not happen all the time. Sometimes you have to start from the bottom. You have to convince one site, one regional manager, usually like the overachiever who wants to climb the ranks and then become the champion of some ideas that nobody did before. And this is where you can see like great champions to, as a test bed for all those initiatives, demonstrate those savings, bundle CapEx with smartness, which is putting AI, putting software optimizations, upgrading, putting more sensors. It does not mean to be ripping and replacing every single element out there, but having a structured approach to designing the program that will maximize the impact, and then scale from there. Then it could become a rinse and repeat across the other divisions and so on and so forth. So that there are two ways to do it. There is no right or wrong. It's just about the appetite, the speed, who's listening and willing to listen, and then we can basically design a program that fits that purpose.
And Youssef, I feel like you're reading my mind, because everything that you mentioned, I'm about to I'm going to ask you guys a question on. Now, the foundation of obviously coming up with an energy savings plan or management plan, whatever that you are working with a client on, is data. Now, where are organizations still leaving value on the table when it comes to metering, monitoring, benchmarking their energy performance? We work with people all the time that still use Excel to manage all of their data as opposed to an AI software system or something like that. So where are these organizations, I don't want to say failing, but not doing what they could do to have the most concrete and valuable data possible?
Yeah. I can go first here. I think there are a couple of things, and Worth I will forget some, and Worth can add. The first one is two mentions, like what you can't see, you can't measure, you can't control. Therefore, like the lack of data. That's number one. Not all sites are connected. Not all sites are upgraded to the point where you can remotely monitor performance and control and optimize what you need to do. That's number one. Number two is even if you can do so, the pitfall is around decentralized model. Like every site has its own manager and trying to do their own thing. You will have, excellent site and very poorly managed site. And that discrepancy of performance between sites, that's where they're leaving money. We've seen best companies or best practices is creating a remote operation center where they can control all of them and figure out like the deviations between, let's say, bad actors and top performers, and take actions pretty quickly. And the third one, unfortunately, it's today's environment is a shortage of labor and field technicians to take actions once a alert or alarm has been identified and needs to be acted upon. Like we heard again and again, they are so busy with just the break and fix, they can do the preventive maintenance, they can do the forecasting, they can do the all the improvement, because just too busy, and the resources are becoming scarce. I think that's where you could see some new AI or new technology, self-healing equipment that can reduce the amount of intervention and hand touch. That's where I think where it become prevalent and reduces the missed opportunities to capture.
Yeah, and I think just building on kind of Youssef's answer, one of the points that I want to really highlight, and I think this is an expansion upon the kind of operating center, is having a centralized place to view portfolio data. And whether or not this is a specific vendor or you're doing something in a Power BI internal tools, just being able to have, okay, here's where our energy MEP asset information exists. information about our different sites, and this is how we think about our different sites. Say that you're a manufacturer and you have large plants and small plants. You then bifurcate against the large plants so that you can benchmark those as a cohort, and then the small plants as a separate cohort, and then your offices as a third cohort. But getting all, because it's not even having the most detailed, get a best in class sensors, but just getting the basics information in front of you and being able to, I think, to what Yusuf highlighted, find the best performing sites, the lowest performing sites, and you can start prioritizing efforts very, very effectively there. And then that can also indicate where do you need to go apply maybe more detailed sensors, sub-metering. Like you can take a pseudo risk-weighted approach where you want to have more granularity and visibility into your highest consuming sites, and specifically for those highest consuming assets on those sites, because any ability to either improve their operation from an energy efficiency standpoint, or likely in order to reduce maintenance by being able to catch issues earlier, that's where you're going to have the greatest return from a portfolio standpoint.
Yeah, and I definitely get that. I know we're running out of time, and I do want to thank the attendees, especially the ones at the beginning who submitted questions or comments in the opening poll question, because we did attack most of those actually today during our discussion. So on the right path there. Now, before we jump into future planning for a company that is looking to work, with Redaptive and PwC, how would they start? What data do they need to bring to the table? What information do they need to bring to the table in order to have the opening conversation?
Yeah, maybe I'll speak from the Redaptive side. The starting point is, what is the business? What is the business outcome that you're working towards as an organization? Really, I know that may sound obvious, but also a little bit unexpected. But everything that you're doing as it pertains to your facility should be serving that objective, and getting that alignment on what that objective looks like and how that will flow through the organization from a decision-making standpoint enables us to get a structured program to achieve that. Once we're all aligned on this is what the outcome of a program in energy efficiency or on-site generation and storage projects should achieve, we then would want to gather a site list with basic information like an address, square footage, utility bills, equipment lists if they're available, as well as any kind of CMMS or maintenance data that could be available. All of that then gets aggregated together, and then going through the lens of the broader business objective, you can then start to evaluate where potential projects where there's the highest potential for them, and then you go deeper there, perform audits, and get closer to performing work.
And then for if I can complement that, from PwC perspective, there are different entry points depending on the maturity of the client. I think the very first step is like, what are the things I can do to improve my cost structure? It could be energy, it could be something else, and this is something that could be a first engagement to identify the big rocks, the biggest rock that we're gonna go, as opposed to chasing the pebbles, right? So what are the biggest saving we can do? It could be operation improvement, it could be procurement, anything. So I think that's number one. If then energy is highlighted as one of them, the next entry point is, how is that energy profile? How is it being consumed? So basically understanding, and then we can help, or clients can do it by themselves, and then come back to us. But the key objective there is truly breaking it down, breaking the monthly bill by assets, by hour, and figuring out what are the biggest consumers, what are the biggest actors, what are the critical assets, what are the non-critical assets, and then start doing some segmentation and categorization on what are the things that can be shifted, what are the things that needs to be replaced, what are the things that needs to be maintained, and if we do so, what's the business case? What would be the new baseline if we do all those changes? So basically building a business case with scenarios of what if we do this and what if we don't do that, and then we create that at a site level, but also at the portfolio level. And then finally, the other entry point is once those initiatives, like this, the strategic pathway to energy efficient operation is kind of defined from a design perspective. It comes to the deployment, right? Whether from tendering, whether from incentive captures, whether from coordination of the project rollout and PMO, and down to the reporting, the compliance, and making sure that everything is going smooth and nothing is being deviated, and the right actions are being, and countermeasures are being taken when there is deviation that being detected, and so on and so forth. So you could see like there is a lot of point where we can interact and help clients, sometimes not necessarily on the asset replacement itself, but setting up a remote operation center, for example, and putting it all digitized and all with some alert, alarm, ability to produce reports, compliance, CSRD. You can think there's many other things that we can do as we help clients in their journey for efficient operations.
Yeah.
No,
And I
great.
think,
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead,
that's
Mark.
right. One last thing, kind of adding on, when you're pulling together the list of potential projects that could occur across a portfolio, something that we're seeing more and more of, it may not even be energy savings as the number one driver. We may see that all refrigeration systems need to be converted from Freon to something else, or there's a R22 kind of need to remove that from the HVAC systems, or lighting needs to be improved for safety across the portfolio. So I really encourage kind of customers when we're going through these conversations to think about what are the kind of more intangible objectives that can also play into how you want to think about pursuing a portfolio of projects.
Okay, and I know we are running out of time here, but I do want to address one thing. We've had a lot of questions come in regarding specific numbers and how the numbers work when it comes to costs, energy savings, incentives, automated grid interactivity, along with, percentage, like explaining ROI and percentage of cost to be paid to adaptive compared to monthly energy bills. I will say, well, we don't have time to answer all of those questions because it's very, very specific, and it's also very extremely variable. So that being said, when we end today's event, there is going to be a survey that pops up on your screen. And if you have very, very specific questions, you will have the opportunity to put those questions in there in terms of, specific number requests and things like that. And the team will get back to you. I didn't want to not address that before the top of the hour. And we only have about 2 minutes or so before we have to close up. So I'm going to give you the floor, just, looking ahead to 2026 and beyond. What are the two things you believe every energy intensive business should be doing to future proof against energy costs or supply volatility?
Yeah. I think the two things, I think the first one is investing in flexible energy structure. So I think that this really boils down maybe more simply. It's like, do you have a resiliency plan? Do you have plans for storage? Does storage make sense in a lot of your sites? I think what we're seeing is just with increasing unreliability of the grid, as well as changes to utility rate tariffs, those will continue flowing through, and there will be more and more emphasis placed on being able to either participate in a demand response program or peak shaving or demand shifting to maximize those costs. And storage, we think, is going to play a massive role in the next few years. I think the second thing that energy intensive industry should be focused on is continue looking for energy efficiency projects. They are out there. They're in the portfolio. They may be hard to uncover. I think that a lot of the talks that we touched on today about consolidating and centralizing that data can help to find them. But the best way to save money on electricity or other forms of energy is to not consume it in the first place, and having kind of a rigorous process from a corporate level to go identify those projects, rank order them, and perform them on a routine basis is going to be one of the most productive ways to get a return on your investment.
Yeah, I think, to your point, I love what you just said, and said it differently is companies today, they have a legacy approach and ways to have a sourcing strategy, to have a procurement strategy, to have a operation strategy, but very few have an energy strategy. And it all comes down to, you know, having an energy strategy, you know, looking at it as a holistic, you know, element that is essentials to the operations and that require a strategy similar to procurement, similar to sourcing, whatnot, right? I think, you know, having that mindset will open up a lot of, then we can have the right discussions on within the organization around how big is the saving, where we need to do it, how we phase it, how we pay it, so on and so forth. But at least, you know, it starts with like the initial sparkle to start all that is the intent of having an energy strategy.
Perfectly summed up to end today's event. Well, thank you for those who have been able to stay on the whole time. Again, we really appreciate any feedback that you could give us on the survey. You will receive an email with a link to this event on demand, and it will be available on the E&E Leader site. But I do want to say thank you to Adaptive and PwC, to Worth and Youssef for the work that you put into today's discussion. It's been a very valuable and time-critical discussion. So hopefully this is not the last time we have to work together. And at this point, I'm going to conclude the webinar, and thank you again for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
And thank you, Jessica. It was awesome.
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you.
Bye.